They say out here in the country you don't stir the hornet's nest unless you're ready to get stung. Most folks know better than to mess with a man's land, especially when that land's fed generations and weathered more storms than the town council ever has. But sometimes power makes people reckless, entitled. And that's how this all began, with one signature that didn't belong to me in a barn full of luxury cars that damn sure didn't belong there either. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just some quiet farmer. I was a man with roots deep in this soil, and I wasn't about to let anyone pave over it with HOA rules and forged papers. This is the story of how they tried to steal my land, and how I made sure they'd never forget whose name was on the deed. Legal maneuvering and a fight for my land won that would turn the tables in ways I could never have imagined. The sun had barely peeked over the ridge when Luke Wren swung open the rusted sliding door of his family's grain warehouse. For a second, the morning light blinded him, casting shadows through the beams and dust hanging in the air. But what he saw made his breath catch in his chest. Rows upon rows of gleaming luxury vehicles, Range Rovers, Escalades, Lexus SUVs, all lined up inside his barn like some glitzy showroom had sprouted overnight in the middle of his wheat field. The scent of motor oil, pine-scented air fresheners, and worn leather invaded the usually earthy smell of grain and dry dust. Luke didn't say a word. He stepped back, blinked twice, and let the surreal absurdity settle. His warehouse, his storage for this year's harvest, had been turned into a luxury valet lot, and hanging from a beam was a flimsy white banner. Willow Creek, HOA, Spring Gala, overflow parking. He stood in silence, hand gripping the doorknob so tight his knuckles turned white. Rage built slow and steady in his chest like a freight train without brakes. This was his land, his livelihood, and someone had taken it like it was a damn mall parking lot. By the time he made it up the gravel path toward the farmhouse, he saw them, three figures approaching like they owned the world. At the center, Evelyn March, HOA, president, ex-councilwoman, political shark turned suburban queen. Evelyn wore a perfectly pressed lilac blazer, a Bluetooth headset clipped to one ear, and that trademark smirk she used like a weapon. Her two clipboard-wielding disciples trailed just behind her, whispering and nodding. "Oh, good morning, Mr. Wren," Evelyn said like nothing was amiss. "I trust the barn's accommodating our guests nicely." Luke stared at her for a long beat. "You want to tell me why the hell my barn's full of cars? I didn't park," Evelyn tisked, brushing off his tone. "Now don't be dramatic. It's just for the weekend. The HOA board approved it last month. Your barn was conveniently empty. A real waste of space, honestly." She handed him a laminated document, some kind of HOA event permit. Printed across the bottom was his name, typed cleanly above a signature that wasn't his. "You forged my signature," he said, voice low. Evelyn laughed softly. "I think you're misremembering. It was all agreed upon." "The community thanks you." Luke didn't respond, not directly. He looked down at the paper, then back at the barn behind him, then at Evelyn's smug face. He wanted to scream. Instead, he let out a slow breath through his nose. "You're gonna regret that," he said. She waved a manicured hand. "Let's not be petty, Luke. It's for the greater good." That evening, Luke sat under the porch light with a bottle of lemonade staring into the open field. The barn glowed faintly in the distance, headlights flickering through the gaps in the wooden planks. He took a slow sip, his calloused fingers tapping the glass. He thought about his father, how the old man had poured 30 years into that land, how he'd warned Luke before he passed. People won't take your land with guns anymore. They'll take it with smiles and paperwork. And now here it was, playing out just like a slow-moving storm. Luke didn't sleep that night. Instead, he called Maya Tran. They hadn't spoken in over a year. She'd left Silver Creek for Denver, built a career as a sharp environmental and property rights attorney. But Luke didn't need a lawyer friend until now. "I've got a forged signature, a stolen barn, and a pissed-off farmer," he said bluntly. There was a pause. Then she said, "Send me everything. I'll drive down tomorrow." Maya Tran's black SUV rolled up the gravel driveway, kicking dust into the morning air. She stepped out, dressed in boots and a blazer, a tablet in one hand and iced coffee in the other. Her eyes scanned the field, then the barn, then Luke, standing with arms crossed, face set like stone. "You weren't exaggerating," she said flatly, staring at the polished vehicles still cluttering the warehouse. "That's a dealership, not a harvest facility." Luke gave a small nod. "They added more yesterday. Some guy in a Porsche nearly reversed into my grain silo." Maya shook her head, already tapping her screen. "You got everything I asked for." Luke handed her a file folder, photos, screenshots of the forged documents, video clips of HOA members directing traffic like parking attendants. Maya flipped through the papers with growing speed, then paused at the copy of the forged permit. "Your name's typed. The signature's wrong. No notarization." "This thing wouldn't hold up against a gust of wind," she muttered. Then she looked up. "Did you report this to anyone yet?" "Sheriff's got his eye on it," Luke said, "but he's being careful. It's a small town. Evelyn's got fingers in too many pies." Maya arched a brow. "Time to cut them off." She turned and pointed to the barn. "Every one of those vehicles is trespassing. That's private agricultural land, being misused, and if we can prove this interferes with your farming operation, they're in violation of state land use codes." Luke cracked a grin. "You always knew how to make paperwork sound like a weapon," she smiled. "That's because it is." Later that day, the two of them marched into the Willow Creek HOA headquarters. Maya carried a briefcase, Luke brought a camera. They walked through the doors like they owned the place. The receptionist blinked in confusion. Do you have an appointment?" "Nope," Maya said without breaking stride. Evelyn was seated in the glass-paneled conference room, sipping tea and flipping through a glossy binder of HOA projects. Her expression soured the moment she saw Luke, and when she saw Maya, her smile faded entirely. Evelyn said coldly, "You brought backup." "I brought legal counsel," Luke replied. Maya set the briefcase on the table with a quiet thunk. "Mrs. March, this is a formal cease and desist. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises and remove all vehicles from Mr. Wren's property. Any failure to comply will result in legal action for trespass, forgery, and unlawful use of agricultural land." Evelyn didn't even blink. "This land belongs to the community. Your client's barn was unused, and this gala raised over $20,000 for the Willow Creek Garden Initiative. It's not trespassing if the board agreed." "You don't own the board," Maya said evenly. "And you sure as hell don't own Luke's land. We spoke with the county assessor's office. There is no easement, no lease, no permit. Just this forged document. We'll be forwarding it to the district attorney." Evelyn's grip tightened on her teacup. "You're making a scene out of nothing." "No, ma'am," Maya said. "You made a crime out of a party." As they walked back to the truck, Maya whispered, "She's not backing down. She's stalling, probably calling her friends on the county board right now." Luke exhaled slowly. "Then we up the pressure." "How?" Maya asked. "We make sure this isn't quiet anymore." That night, Luke uploaded the first video, just 2 minutes long, a walkthrough of his barn panning across the rows of luxury cars, zooming in on the fake HOA banner, closing with a tight shot of the forged permit. He added a simple caption, "Silver Creek farmer wakes up to find his barn stolen by the HOA." The video exploded overnight. Local news picked it up, then state news. By morning, it had over 250,000 views and counting. Luke's phone lit up with messages, strangers, old friends, other farmers telling him their own horror stories about abusive HOAs. And among the comments, one name popped up again and again, Evelyn March. By the next day, the warehouse looked like a media circus. News vans lined the road. Curious locals hovered at the fence line. And Evelyn. She was now officially on defense. But the best part came when Sheriff Tom showed up with a county inspector. "I hear you've been running a valet service," Evelyn the sheriff said with his signature drawl. "This is harassment," she snapped. "This man is slandering me, ma'am," said the inspector, holding up a clipboard. "We need to inspect the premises for zoning violations, illegal occupancy, and misuse of land. If we find any code violations or forged approvals, you may be liable for substantial penalties." Evelyn's facade cracked. She turned to Luke, seething. "You think you've won." Luke simply smiled. "Not yet." The sun had barely crested the hills when the rumble of diesel engines shattered the morning stillness. 3 tow trucks rolled in formation down the dirt path toward Luke's farm. Their heavy chains clinked in rhythm, their drivers grim-faced and ready. Sheriff Tom stood at the edge of the property line, hat pulled low, clipboard in hand. His presence was less about enforcement now, and more about ceremony. This was the final act, and everyone knew it. Luke leaned against the barn door, sipping his coffee, watching, as the convoy parked in a neat line. He nodded once to Big Earl, who cracked his knuckles and grinned, like a man about to win a bar fight. He didn't start. Clock just hit 48. Sheriff Tom said quietly. "They had their chance. Time to clean house," Luke replied. The first SUV was a white Mercedes GLE, parked so close to the grain elevator that Luke had to squeeze sideways just to get around it. Rosie, who'd brought her own flatbed and zero tolerance for BS, winched it up, like it was an overgrown weed in her garden. A crowd began to form. Neighbors, reporters, curious strangers who had seen the video and wanted to witness the spectacle in person. Karen, yes, Karen, herself had arrived by then, still in her designer heels, and immovable denial sprinted toward the barn the moment the first car was loaded. She shrieked like a kettle about to blow. "You can't do this. This is illegal. This is my event." Sheriff Tom held up a hand. "Ma'am, this is private agricultural property. These vehicles are unauthorized, unpermitted, and now classified as abandoned under County Code 126B. You've had your 48 hours, but we had approval." "You had forged approval," Maya cut in, stepping beside Luke. "That's not the same thing." Karen's eyes darted around, seeking backup, but none came. Not from her board, not from the HOA, not even from her husband, who was sitting in his Lexus with the engine running, pretending he didn't know her. One by one, the vehicles were hauled away. With each metallic groan of the winch, Karen's voice grew more frantic. "You don't know what this will cost us." "Oh, I do," Maya said dryly. "I tallied the damages last night. Luke's warehouse lost $10,000 in revenue just from block storage, and that doesn't include the community funds you misused. That's another discussion entirely." 1. "I believe the state attorney will be having with you shortly." Karen tried to bluff. "You'll regret this, all of you. I know people, important people." Sheriff Tom raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, if those people are lawyers, I'd call them now." The crowd laughed. Then came the final blow. As the last SUV disappeared over the ridge, Sheriff Tom stepped forward and handed Karen a sealed envelope. "This here is a notice of investigation. You're being formally reported for misappropriation of HOA funds, falsification of legal documents, and trespass. You'll be contacted for a deposition within the week." Karen tore the envelope open, eyes scanning the document, hands trembling. Then she did something no one expected. She dropped it right there in the dirt, then collapsed into the grass, mascara streaking her cheeks. Her fall from grace wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. A slow, defeated sinking of someone who realized the game was over, and they'd never really understood the rules to begin with. Later that afternoon, Luke stood in the center of his now empty warehouse. The faint scent of clean grain and diesel lingered in the air. The barn was his again. Untouched, respected. Billy leaned against the doorframe, chewing on a piece of straw. "You think she'll actually go to jail?" Luke shrugged. "Don't care. Long as she never parks another G-Wagon in here again." Maya stepped up beside him. "You know, you could turn this whole mess into a TED Talk. How to beat a corrupt HOA without breaking a sweat." Luke chuckled. "Nah, I think I'll just stick to farming." She smiled. "Smart man.